For example, Ray Tillman has driven 18-wheelers for 23 years, covering more than 2 million miles across the United States. He knew the cab of his Kenworth T680 better than his own bedroom. The worn leather seat fit his body like a glove. The assortment of tiny mementos adhered on the dashboard. The specific rattle that began at about 65 meters from the glove compartment. Ray was what other drivers referred to as highway smart at the age of 51. He was aware of which interstate sections were badly maintained, which truck stops had good food, and which regions had excessive highway patrol. From the unusual perspective of his taxi, he had seen America gradually change. Farms turning into subdivisions, towns growing, others dying, and once bustling factories now standing deserted. However, Highway 50 in Nevada was not like that. Nothing had changed. It would not alter. This lonely 287-mile route, known as the loneliest road in America, sliced across enormous stretches of mountain and desert. Ranges, linking little remote settlements that appeared to be stuck in a bygone era. Cell service was intermittent at best, non-existent at worst. Hours. Could pass on the two-lane route before another car appeared. It was merciless to those who were unprepared, but lovely in its emptiness. Ray usually stayed off Highway 50. It was impractical for his regular trips due to the seclusion and lack of services. However, an I-80 bridge failure had necessitated a detour, and his to transfer industrial equipment to Reno. The dispatcher had led him across the desolate core of Nevada. In order to reach Fallon by early evening and go on to Reno the next day, he had begun the crossing from Ellery at dawn. As the sagebrush plains, rocky mountain passes, and expansive valleys that extended to far-off mountain ranges swept past his windows, the morning went by without incident. The air was clear and crisp in October. Above the desolate land, the sky is a never-ending blue dome. About 2:00 p.m., Ray turned on his radio. On 50 westbound. Are you listening? This is heading your way from the east. Ray's hand went to his CB. Out here, human interaction was welcomed. It's heading west. I got you. Heading east. How old are you? I'm just in Austin. I have an odd report to share. For the past hour, I've been listening to the same voice on the radio. A woman requesting assistance. I assumed it was a gamer, but it's becoming strange. Over. Ray scowled. Austin trailed him by almost 40 meters. I've never heard anything. Like, what is she saying? Over. Rebecca, she says. The car broke down. Help is needed. She keeps claiming to be just past the canyon at milepost 346. The problem is that I looked at my map. Milepost 346 does not exist on Highway 50. That's not how high the numbers go. Over, Ray said. Probably just someone pulling your leg. Children playing trucker with a CB. Over. I had the same thought. She sounds afraid, though. Real terrified. And 1 minute the transmission is beautifully clear. The next it is jam-packed with static. I keep hearing her in the same places, but it seems like she's moving in and out of range. Over. Ray remarked, Well, I'll keep my ears open. Eastbound travel is safe. Over and out. Ray brushed the conversation aside and headed west. The panorama became a photographer's paradise of golden light and purple shadows as the sun crept closer to the craggy mountain summits. He would soon need to locate somewhere, to stop. It was not a good idea to drive on these roads after dark. Too many deer and untamed horses that can suddenly show up. He heard her for the first time then. Hi, is anybody present? My vehicle broke down. I need assistance. I'm just past the canyon at milepost 346. If anyone can hear me, please do so. It was a youthful female voice with a hint of desperation. Ray took a quick look at his radio. Since his previous chat, he had not touched it. I'm Ray Tillman, traveling west on 50. I understand, however, this highway does not have milepost 346. Could you name another landmark for me? Over. Then he heard silence. Hi there. Who's there? Rebecca Scheller is this person. Just before the canyon at milepost 346, my automobile broke down. It's becoming dark. Please assist. Like a recording, the message was exactly the same, word for word, with the identical inflections. Ray made another attempt. It's Rye here, Rebecca. I understand, but I require additional details. What sort of vehicle do you drive? Are there any town lights visible? Once again, the same message was reiterated. Ray looked at his mileage. He had just reached mile marker 152, much less 300, much less 346. The voice continued to speak every few minutes for the following 20 miles, with the same message, and without ever responding to his answers. Then, almost as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. With the sun already low in the sky, Ray pulled into a little gas station near Austin. He told the attendant about the odd radio signal as he filled up. An elderly man whose eyes had been squinting into the Nevada sun for decades and whose skin was leathery. The man remarked without much surprise. Heard her yourself, did you? Rye questioned. You know about this? Slowly, the attendant nodded. Began almost 3 years ago. At milepost 346, the same woman, Rebecca, breaks down every time. The problem is that Nevada Highway 50 only reaches milepost 436. East to west are the numbers. 346 does not exist. Ray came to the conclusion that it was just someone playing games. Perhaps the attendant wasn't persuaded. The strange thing is that in 1987, Rebecca Scheller vanished while driving alone across the country. Her vehicle was never located. The cool evening air had nothing to do with the chill Ray felt. That is a significant coincidence. There are a lot of coincidences on Highway 50, the man said, returning Ray's credit card. Advice: locate a place to rest before nightfall. About 30 miles to the west is Cold Front Lodge. Good location. Matt is the owner's name. Tell him you were sent by Joe. Ray stopped into Cold Front Lodge, a small motel with an adjacent cafe that had seen better days as the sun was sinking. Just 3 more. There were cars in the lot, a highway patrol car, an ancient pickup vehicle, and a sedan with California license plates. Ray discovered the owner of the diner, a stout man in his 60s with a salt and pepper beard working the grill. A middle-aged couple occupied a booth by the window, while 2 state troopers sat at the counter. Ray remarked, "You must be Mac," and he slipped up on a stool. "Joe back in Austin said to tell you he sent me." Mac gave a nod. "Any of Joe's friends is welcome. What are you going to have?" After a moment of hesitation, Rye said, "Did either of you police hear anything odd on your radios today? A woman named Rebecca is requesting assistance." The soldiers looked at each other. It was the elder who spoke. "You heard her too, huh?" "Started about 100 miles back," Ray attested. The same message is being repeated. Milestone 346. Every couple of months we receive calls concerning her. Rebecca Scheller has been missing since '87, the younger trooper added. Car was never located. Ray mumbled, "So it is the same." "Rebecca?" "No, it's not," the senior soldier firmly stated, "because Rebecca Scheller's been dead for 35 years. It's a horrible joke that someone is telling you. If they never found her, how can you be certain she's dead?" Rye inquired. The soldiers looked at each other again. The older side because they discovered enough of her body to utilize dental records to verify her identification. The remainder had vanished, coyotes and mountain lions, according to the official report. When M brought Ray's burger, the conversation came to a halt. There was an awkward silence in the tiny cafe as the soldiers finished their coffee and departed. The middle-aged couple at the booth stood up to go while Rye ate. At Ray's side, the woman hesitated. She whispered softly, "We heard what you were talking about. We also heard her. However, the officers withheld something from you. On this section, someone disappears every several years. October every year, always after an automobile problem near the canyon has been reported. Her spouse removed her arm, but no one else has ever been located. Come on, Diane, come on. Rebecca Scheller, that is. She was done. They just discovered fragments of her." Ray turned to Mac once they had gone. "Is that accurate? Here, people disappear." Mac carefully cleaned the counter before responding. "Everywhere, people disappear. Deserts are harsh environments. Without water, get stuck, take a false turn and wander off. The remainder is handled by nature. However, the voice on the Radio is a nasty joker. Mac didn't interrupt again. You have room 6. According to the weather report, there will be a storm overnight. It's best to wait until dawn. Ray accepted the key, but his uneasiness persisted. He tried using the TV in his room to divert his attention, but the antiquated set could only pick up one hazy station. After a while, he switched it off and reclined on the bed, listening to the wind outside that had started to build up. As is common in this location, his phone displayed no service. He carried his own CB radio in from the truck and examined it out of habit. Hi, is anybody present? Through the speaker, the now familiar voice crackled. My vehicle broke down. I need assistance. Milepost 346 is where I am, just beyond the canyon. Ray sat up straight. As though she were closer, the woman's voice seemed stronger and more distinct than before. It's Rye here, Rebecca. You're heard. Just where are you? Highway 50 does not have a milepost 346, for the voice strayed from its script for the first time. Can you hear me, Ray? Help me, please. I've spent so much time stuck here. The canyon, the echo. Down here, it's dark. Ray felt a shiver go down his back. What canyon are you referring to, Rebecca? Several canyons are traversed by Highway 50. Now you're close. Before the highway was rerouted, it was on the old road. Before, things were different. Help me, please. He will. Return. Who is returning? Ray insisted. Who do you fear, Rebecca? The channel was packed with static. Milepost 396, not 346 then. The sign is incorrect. Flipped around. Have no faith. The broadcast suddenly stopped. Ray looked at his map. Less than 10 miles west of where he was now was milepost 396. It was impossible to sleep now. Ray walked his tiny room, trying to decide what to do. This was an elaborate joke, according to the logical half of his brain. Not so sure was the other part, the part that had persevered through decades of travel by following his gut. His CB cracked again at 3:17 a.m. It wasn't Rebecca's voice this time. Got another one, remarked a man speaking. Low, gruff. California plates, young woman, broken down at the canyon, now bringing her to the plunge. The voice was uncannily similar to Max's. I thought you mentioned that tonight's storm would keep everyone off the road, a different voice answered. Desperate people are unpredictable. Hurry up, said the first voice in response. In 3 hours, the sun will rise. Ray approached the window and cautiously looked through the drapes. The pickup truck he had observed earlier had 2 individuals lifting something heavy into its bed, which he could make out in the parking lot's poor light. Something around the size of a person, covered with what appeared to be a tarp. The California sedan had vanished. With his heart racing, Rye gathered his things and crept out of the rear of his room. Being cautious to remain in the darkness, he slipped to his truck. He didn't turn on the motor right away after getting inside. In the unlikely event that there would be sufficient signal for an emergency call, he instead dialed 911. He heard, "Hello, is anyone there?" rather than a dispatcher when the call connected. My car broke down. I need help, I said. The voice of Rebecca. After dropping the phone, Ray turned on his truck and drove out from the parking lot, leaving his lights off. He didn't switch them on until he was 4 miles down the highway, at which point he sped west into the night. He discovered just what the map indicated at milepost 396. The highway turned sharply around a huge gorge. However, there was another factor. He could just make out in his headlights a fading dirt track that veered off toward the edge of the canyon. Maybe a previous highway alignment from before the construction of the current one. Ray slowed, uncertain. If there was even a remote possibility that the California woman was still alive, his entire rational being begged him to keep driving and put as much distance between himself and Cold Front Lodge as possible. He saw headlights from the motel's pickup vehicle in his rearview mirror. Ray made up his mind. He struck the petrol, driving his large truck at hazardous speeds on the winding roads. After several miles of pursuit, the pickup eventually fell back. Ray immediately went to the highway patrol office in the next town to report what he had seen. Despite their skepticism, the cops decided to look into it. Rye got a call 3 days later. At Cold Front Lodge, they had discovered nothing unusual. Mac had an alibi for the aforementioned night. He would been in Reno as confirmed by hotel surveillance footage and credit card records. There was no such room as the one Rai identified as his. For renovations, the motel had been shuttered. The most unsettling fact was that there was no documentation of a Rebecca Scheller ever going missing in Nevada. Highway 50 was never driven by Rai again. He asked for routes that would keep him on busy major interstates with mobile service. However, he occasionally hears a faint voice on his CB radio in his truck late at night. "Hi, is anybody present? My vehicle broke down. I need assistance. I'm just past the canyon at milepost 346. If anyone can hear me, please do so." Static occasionally appears in the background. He believes he hears a different voice. "Got another one?" said the usual gruff, low voice. I've driven my reliable 207 Peterbilt 389 Cab 17 for over 30 years, covering more than 4 million miles on American roads. I am 56 years old, and every pain I experience bears the imprint of the road. Calloused hands from constant chain tightening, eyes wrinkled from squinting at dawn and at night, and the inexorable forward hunch from leaning into the steering column. The cab, a dimly illuminated cocoon of hums, rattles, and the soft hum of a diesel engine, is a haven for me. Gauges, CB static, and the changing landscape are my only company out here. At 4:30 a.m. on that Tuesday, I went to Detroit's industrial yard to pick up a standard load of generic car components. I hooked the CB mic to its holder on channel 19, as silent as usual, and eased onto I-75, watching the city lights vanish as the sky rose toward morning. There was nothing delicate, no unusual deadlines, just the familiar, predictable routine of Isola to Dock 7. My strategy is to drive for 18 hours, have a 10-hour rest, and then drive again till Oklahoma City. I arrived in Indianapolis late in the morning and got into the Flying J for the usual coffee and fuel run. The custom remained unchanged. Black coffee, diesel pump, checklist for the trip, papers organized. As we went by, 2 additional owner-operators nodded. Road warriors' unspoken friendship. I dialed in my favorite AM oldie station, which has longtime friends Johnny Cash and Juan Jennings, back in Cab 17. I found myself in Illinois in the afternoon, where the landscape was replete with cornfields. I avoided off-road hypnosis by alternating math podcasts with my cruise at 65 FA. There were clean highways ahead, according to my satellite GPS. There are no traffic warnings. Until milepost 404 on I-80, just west of Juliet, everything was as it should have been. I arrived at the truck stop shortly before 5 p.m. My 10-hour break is about to begin, awaiting the sleeper berth of Cab 17. Blackout curtains, a memory foam mattress, and a tiny fan hump. I have a 3 a.m. alarm set. I'm confident that there will be a good 6 hours before the required restart. I recall reflecting on how serene it seemed. The soft snore of the cabin heater, the distant clang of a diner door closing, the deep rumble of idle vehicles. At precisely 3:17 a.m., I woke up. In the dark, my watch gleamed red. Odd, I would have scheduled it for 3 hours. The silence seemed much stranger. No radio crackle, no idle trucks, no engine hum. The cab seemed abnormally motionless, as if time had stopped. I opened one eye. There was no engine glow underneath. The dash lights were off, and the gauges were dark. In front of me, my breath puffed white. The cab is excessively cold. I massaged my face. I must have left the dome light on while I slept, and the battery must have died. A rookie error, yet uncommon. I turned the switch for the dome lamp on. Dead. My hand went to the ignition key. Turn. Nothing. No click. No rumbling. I swore. The 12-V8 system in Cab 17 has allowed me to. For the first time in years, it was down. I opened the door and leaped onto the concrete. My clothing was being bitten by the cold. Like ghosts, my breath hung in the air. I saw them before reaching for jumper cords. On the passenger door, there are 3 deep scrapes that are almost a foot long and have sharp, new edges. I knelt down and swept the gouges with my mag light. They weren't arbitrary. Long, angry, Strokes had been used to scrape them by someone who had taken the time to do so. My heart began to race. To vandalize a truck at 3 a.m, who in the world would crawl onto an expressway shoulder? I looked around the deserted parking lot. Beyond the orange floodlights, not a silhouette, not a soul. The gravel crunched beneath my boots as I jogged back to cab 17. I reached for my phone. No signal, of course. Adhered to its mount was the CB microphone. Nevertheless, I keyed it. Roadside assistance is required for cab 17, breakers 1 and 9. After hissing, the speaker stopped talking. I cut the squelch knob. Static was unyieldingly silent. Then my own voice crackled through, hollow and clipped. Assistance is required for breaker 1N, cab 17. I almost dropped the microphone. Echo wasn't that. My voice was looped back. I frantically keyed. Who is this? Over. A faint whisper, a raspy breath, and more static. Come on in. I'm chilly. My blood was freezing. I spun around. Just the dark sky and the tall trailer of my truck. After locking the door from the outside, I got back inside. My fingers trembled so much that my seatbelt would not fasten the first time. Desperate, I turned and jammed the key into the ignition. Fortunately, the engine coughed to life on one cylinder, allowing me to roll. I once stalled after denting the throttle as I backed onto the freeway. Cab 17 was closed. The engine then found itself. I drove recklessly into I-80 traffic, stomping on the gas. The darkness is being mowed down by headlights. As the distance between me and the parking lot increased, my heart rate increased. I said, "Breaker 9, this is cab 17 on I-80 westbound," while twisting the CV microphone. "In need of a, should I leap or tow? Please come in." Finally, a voice filled with static responded. Hank, the obliging trucker, offers a jump. Suddenly, the world didn't feel so alone. Shaken and bruised, I stumbled into the next truck stop and sloppily named my rig. As the engine stabilized, Hank's cables screamed to life. The scratches shone in the glare of the headlights. What took place? When the rig purred normally, he queried. "Don't know," I was able to say. The battery was dead when I woke up. The door has scratches on it. Over CB, I heard my own voice. Hank's expression grew gloomy. Cab 17. I believed that rig had been sold in Idaho 3 years prior. Sold. Since then, I've been operating it. He gave a solemn nod. The buyer fled in the direction of Ellery Env. The same thing. Voice on CB, scratched door, dead battery. The truck was empty, the engine was running, and the man had disappeared. I took a deep breath. How about him? No one is aware. No traces, no indication of resistance. Simply vanished. Other than cracks in the door, they found nothing. A chilly knot formed in my stomach. What do you suppose it was, Hank? He glanced around the parking lot. The rig is said to be cursed. Cab 17 maintains its count. Every time a driver intervenes, something is taken. Even though my knuckles were white, I scoffed. You think so? Hank's mouth tightened. It's not necessary to believe. The records are in front of me. The original owner was one of the 17 missing men connected to that rig. My head whirled. At truck stops, I had heard ghost stories and rumors, but I never trusted them. I felt as though I had just stepped into folklore. I thanked Hank, swapped his wires, and got back into cab 17 at 70 Bain. The yard was black and the headlights of the rig picketed it. I double-checked all the locks, silent witnesses, and made 2 decisions. I would immediately warn my firm that I would never again drive that rig alone after nightfall. A mechanic. Identified a parasitic draw as the cause of the battery drain a few days later. Behind the dash, wiring had been tampered with. In an attempt to trap the driver, the person who scratched the door had also tampered with the electrical system. Thinking of the nighttime predator who was aware of my schedule made me shudder. I no longer pilot cab 17, yet she still roams the roadways. I was given a more recent T680 with RFID electronics. Lock. Every anomaly has been recorded. I occasionally pass mile marker 237 on I-80, which is the same section when the Eerie vanished. Unaware of the passenger who arrives for drivers with the number 17, I tip my hat to the deserted road, knowing that cab 17 might be waiting, its next victim dozing in the sleeper berth. Run if you ever notice 3 scratches on your door in the dark or hear your own voice over a dead CB at 3:17 a.m. Considering that Cab 17 collects its debts one person at a time, and you're never truly alone on the road once you discover its secret. Once more. For almost 20 years, Clint Donovan had been transporting lumber from the mountains of Idaho. His body at 48 was a testament to those years. A back that ached on chilly mornings from the innumerable hours spent securing huge loads of pine and spruce bound for sawmills across the Northwest, calloused hands, and a perpetual squint from gazing into mountain sunlight. Clint usually took day trips, negotiating the perilous logging roads that wound through the Clearwater and Nez Perce National Forests, in contrast to the long-haul drivers who crossed state lines and slept in their cabs. The small group of forest workers who lived off these isolated woodlands were familiar with his 2010 Western Star. Clint's favorite month in the mountains was October. The number of tourists had decreased. The hillsides glowed with autumn hues, and the summer heat had given place to clear, crisp days. However, October also brought with it unexpected weather. Especially at higher elevations, warm afternoons could turn into snowstorms by evening. Clint reached the Mackenzie Creek logging site just after sunrise on October 17th. For weeks, a crew has been working in this location, removing an area of forest that has been harmed by a beetle infestation. About 90 miles distant, stacks of freshly cut lumber awaited delivery to the Bennett sawmill in Lewin. Pete Rollins, the site foreman, called out to Clint, "Morning, Clint," as he got out of his taxi. "You're our last haul today. The weather forecast for this afternoon looks hazy." Clint looked up at the clear blue sky and said, "I don't think it's going to be stormy." Pete gave him a hot cup of coffee from his thermos. Fronts are coming in from the west, and by nightfall, it should be 6 to 8 inches above 6,000 feet. "Are you taking Bear Creek Pass?" "I can beat the storm," Clint said confidently. "Get loaded up and I'll be through the pass before noon." Bear Creek Pass was the most direct route from the logging site to the highway, cutting the journey by almost an hour compared to the gentler but longer southern route. The pass climbed to 7,200 ft through a series of tight switchbacks before descending into the valley beyond. It was challenging in good weather, but potentially deadly in bad weather. Pete. The loading took longer than expected, and one of the crane's cables developed a problem that required temporary repairs, so it was already after 10 a.m. when Clint's truck was fully loaded with 30 tons of raw timber, secured with heavy chains and binders. Each driver in the logging industry made their own decisions about what risks they were willing to take. It was part of the culture, a combination of self-reliance and calculated gambles based on years of experience. The brilliant blue sky to the west had started to turn into a wall of gray that was engulfing the faraway mountain peaks. "Do you still think you can overcome it?" Pete inquired as Clint finished his last check of the load and looked at the incoming clouds. Clint had driven Bear Creek Pass in all types of weather, including rain, snow, and fog so dense that you could almost see the road's edge. The Western Star was in good condition. "This old girl has seen worse." Pete handed him a two-way radio. "Keep this on. Cell reception is spotty up there on a good day. Storm will make it worse." Clint put the radio in his jacket pocket, got into his cab, and started driving. "I'll be fine," Clint assured him, adding that if he pushed a little, he could still make it through the pass before the weather turned serious. As he turned onto the Forest Service road, Clint noticed how quickly the weather was changing. The temperature gauge on his dashboard showed a 7-degree drop in the last hour. The wind had increased, sending the first few snowflakes swirling against his windshield, and the sky above him had changed from partly cloudy to a menacing slate gray. The first few miles of the trip down the rutted logging road that would eventually connect with the Forest Service road leading to Bear Creek Pass were uneventful, with the truck's powerful engine handling the rough terrain with practiced ease. He crackled from his pocket and said, "I copy, Pete. What's up?" "The Weather Service just upgraded to a winter storm warning, coming in faster than they thought. You might want to consider turning around, taking the southern route." Clint looked at his watch and realized that taking the southern route now would put him at the sawmill after dark, and that he had already traveled almost 15 miles. The road started to climb more steeply as Clint got closer to the pass. The scattered snowflakes had given way to a steady fall, accumulating on the shoulders of the road and dusting the massive load of timber behind him. Clint decided that turning back would waste all that progress and that he was going to keep going. He was already almost to the base of the pass and would radio when he was done. He shifted down, the engine working harder as the grade increased. Bear Creek Pass had earned its notorious reputation. Reputation, honestly. Over the years, the narrow winding road had claimed its share of vehicles, primarily tourists who overestimated their driving skills or underestimated the difficulty, but it had also taken logging trucks. 5 years prior, a driver named Mike Holloway had lost his brakes while traveling down the western side, and the wreckage had been visible from the road for months until the Forest Service finally sent in a helicopter to remove the twisted metal. The storm struck with unexpected ferocity as Clint rounded a bend that marked the start of the pass proper. Came in fast. Clint muttered to himself, turning his wipers to their highest setting and turning on his fog lights. The temperature gauge now read 28, cold enough for the wet road surface to start icing over. The steady snowfall abruptly turned into a swirling white curtain driven by wind gusts that buffeted the tall profile of the loaded truck. Clint slowed his speed further, navigating the first of the 7 major switchbacks that climbed toward the summit. Clint could just see the sheer drop off to his right, a cliff face plunging several hundred feet to the boulder-strewn creek that gave the pass its name through the swirling snow. By the time he reached the 3rd switchback, the snow was falling so heavily that Clint had to lean forward, straining to see the road ahead. The curves were getting harder to navigate, and the back end of the trailer wanted to slide outward on the slick surface. With the weight of the timber pressing down, the Western Star's engine growled steadily. Experience. "What's your position?" Pete asked Clint. The radio crackled once more. Clint reported that the weather was really terrible, with heavy snow and visibility down to perhaps 50 feet at this point. Roger said, "We're hearing reports of whiteout conditions at the summit. You still think you can make it through?" Clint paused, but he was already committed. There was no other option but to keep going. "I'll take it slow." The road was too narrow to turn around, and it would be riskier to back down than to keep going. He was navigating the 4th switchback when a particularly strong gust of wind struck the truck broadside. The tall wall of timber acted as a sail, and Clint felt the right wheels momentarily lose contact with the road. For a horrific moment, he thought the entire rig might topple over, falling into the ravine below. When Clint arrived at the small turnout area at the top of Bear Creek Pass, where drivers could stop and check their brakes before starting the descent, the full force of the storm became evident. The wind howled around the cab, reducing visibility to just feet as snow and ice particles flew horizontally through the air, and the turnout was already covered in several inches of fresh powder, with drifts forming against the guardrail. Western Star's weight settled back onto all wheels, and Clint exhaled slowly, his knuckles turning white on the steering wheel. "I needed to check the load before starting down the western slope because if any of the binders had loosened during the ascent, the consequences during the steeper descent could be catastrophic." Clint pulled on his heavy work coat and gloves and stepped out into the storm, where the wind immediately stole his breath, and the bitter cold hit him. The wind rocked the cab, making an eerie groaning sound as it forced its way through the countless crevices of the loaded timber. The snow had packed itself into the gaps between the logs, actually helping to stabilize the load. He was checking the last binder when he heard a distinct cracking sound, even over the howling wind. Clint froze, listening intently, and the sound came again, louder this time, coming from somewhere in the massive stack of timber. Clint knew that wood expands and contracts with temperature changes, but these sounds were different. Clint instinctively backed away, his eyes focused on the tall wall of timber, and the radio in his pocket crackled to life. "Clint, you still there? Storm's getting worse. What's your status?" he asked. But before he could reply, there was another crack, a slight shift in the load, and a slight movement of one of the upper logs, which disturbed the snow that had accumulated on top. Clint lunged for the cab, but it was too late. The failure of one binder transferred additional stress to the others, creating a catastrophic chain reaction, and he watched in horror as the entire load began to shift, thousands of pounds of timber breaking free of their steel binders. A new sound joined the clamor, a deep groaning followed by the distinct snapping of metal, restraints and sliding sideways off the trailer. The first logs hit the ground with a thunderous impact, and then more. Clint jumped under the truck as the avalanche of timber crashed down around him, and the ground shook with each impact, making the sound deafening in the small turnout. When the movement finally stopped, there was an eerie silence that was only broken by the occasional creak of settling wood and the wind's constant howl. Clint stayed frozen in his protective position, barely daring to breathe. Slowly he realized that he was lying in the snow under the rear axle of the truck, snowflakes swirling around him, blending with the sawdust that now filled the air. "Do you copy, Clint? What was that noise?" The radio was still in his pocket, somehow intact, and Clint picked it up with trembling hands. "I'm here." Load moved. Most of the wood was gone. "Are you hurt?" Clint checked his mind, but nothing appeared to be damaged. His right shoulder ached where he had struck the floor, but he said, "I'm fine. Although I can't see from here, the truck is most likely damaged." Pete's voice ordered, "Stay put. I'm calling search and rescue." Clint hurriedly said, "No. No need for that. I'm not hurt. The truck may still be able to be driven." The trailer had been wrenched at an odd angle, and two of its tires were flattened from the impact of falling timber. Clint cautiously crawled out of his shelter to find a scene of chaos, with logs strewn across the turnout, some precariously balanced against the guardrail, others hanging partially over the edge of the cliff. However, the cab miraculously looked mostly intact, the engine still running, white exhaust blending with the swirling snow. And Clint realized with increasing dread that he was now in serious trouble. Even if the truck could still move, trying. To drive down the steeper side of the pass, the western slope, with an unstable, partially loaded trailer, would be suicidal. Staying put meant spending the night in the cab at over 7,000 feet in a worsening blizzard, hoping the fuel would last until morning. "Pete, I'm going to try to make it back down the eastern slope," Clint decided. Pete was quick to respond, saying, "The weather service says this storm is going to get worse before it gets better. Plus, you'd be backing down those switchbacks. Too dangerous." Clint knew Pete was right, but the alternative, waiting helplessly, as night fell and temperatures continued to plummet, seemed even worse. "The trailer's damaged, but the cab seems okay. I can disconnect if necessary." Clint was thinking about his few options when a new sound came from the storm. The low rumble of a diesel engine. At first he thought he was dreaming, but the sound got louder and louder until it came from the western side of the pass. Clint waved his arms frantically, but he doubted he could be seen through the heavy snowfall. Out of the swirling white came the silhouette of another truck, a logging rig like his own, moving slowly through the dangerous conditions. A woman in her 30s with weathered features that identified her as an experienced logger, with a name patch that read Sarah Larson, slowed and then stopped as the truck's door swung open and a figure wrapped in bulky winter gear stepped down. "Looks like you could use some help," the woman's voice called out, and Clint felt relief as the driver got closer. "Load shifted," Clint explained, pointing to the strewn-about timber. Sarah looked around the scene professionally and said, "No, you can't. Not safely. But I've got chains and a tow bar. We can secure what's left of your load. Disconnect your trailer if necessary, and I'll guide you back down the eastern slope." They worked together for the next hour in the deteriorating storm, rigging Clint's truck for the treacherous journey back down and securing loose logs. Clint said, "I've never seen another logger up here in weather like this." As they were about to leave, both of them covered in snow, their fingers numb from wearing heavy gloves. "What brings you over the pass today?" Sarah asked, pausing before responding. "Got a call about a driver in trouble. Happened to be closest." "From whom, Pete?" "Someone from dispatch," she said vaguely. "Getting down before dark is more important than anything else right now." The descent was nerve-wracking, requiring Sarah's truck to lead the way through each switch back in reverse, its tail lights the only visible reference point in the whiteout conditions. By the time they reached the bottom of the pass, night had fallen completely, transforming the storm into a confusing black void filled with swirling white. They arrived at the logging camp shortly after. It had taken more than 4 hours to get there, and Pete and a few other employees hurried out to greet them. "We thought we'd lost you up there," Pete said, giving Clint a shoulder pat. Fortunately, Sarah was nearby. Clint turned to thank his rescuer, but paused. "Wait, how did you know to call Sarah? I never mentioned needing help." "Call Sarah? I didn't call anyone. I called search and rescue after your radio died after that crashing sound. They're still putting together a team to go up there tomorrow, but she claimed that dispatch had called her." Clint persisted. Pete shook his head. "Our dispatch closed at 5 o'clock, and I've been on the radio with them all afternoon, and they never mentioned sending another driver." Clint turned to face Sarah, who was standing a little distance away from the group, her face unreadable in the camp's dim light. "Who are you?" Clint asked quietly. "Really?" Sarah steadily met his gaze. Someone who knew what it was, like to be stuck on that pass. She looked at her truck and then back at Clint 5 years ago. During Mike Holloway's accident, the brakes on the western slope failed, and Clint felt the blood drain from his face. She said simply, "Be careful out there, Clint. The mountains. Don't forgive mistakes." The official report listed Clint's rescue as a fortuitous encounter with another logging professional. No driver named Sarah Larson was registered with any of the timber companies operating in the area. The truck she drove, which matched the description of the one Mike Holloway had been driving 5 years earlier, was never located. Clint Donovan still drives the Idaho logging roads, but he never takes Bear Creek Pass anymore, not even in perfect weather. Sarah turned and walked back to her truck before Clint could react, and he stood motionless as she walked away, her tail lights quickly engulfed by the swirling snow. And as a little gesture of appreciation for a debt that will never be fully paid back, he puts a thermos of hot coffee at the foot of the pass in October, when the first snows start to fall on the high country. For 17 years, Warren Mitchell had been a truck driver. At 43, the creases around his eyes had deepened from years of squinting into sunrises and sunsets, and his once black beard was now dotted with gray. In contrast to many long-distance drivers who favored isolation, Warren relished the interpersonal relationships he formed while traveling. From fellow drivers exchanging tips over CB radio to servers at restaurants who recalled his preference for coffee. He currently works in northern Arizona, refrigerated medicines from Nashville. Due to the limited delivery window, it was necessary to relax during periods of high traffic and drive through the night whenever feasible. Warren spotted difficulties on I-40 in western Oklahoma just after 2 a.m. An unusual vibration in the steering wheel was followed by a slight change in the engine temperature monitor. With his Freightliner Cascadia, Warren was able to detect even the smallest alteration in its functioning. He whispered, "Something's not right with you tonight, old girl," and lowered the accelerator. The shaking from the engine compartment added to the increasing vibration. Warren turned on his hazard lights, dropped to 40 mph, and started looking for an exit because there were no cars behind him. In his headlights, Sir 3M signaled a green sign. Sears Main Street was a 2-lane roadway that was accessible via the exit ramp. With the exception of a few petrol stations and street lamps, the majority of businesses were dark. Warren noticed Richardson's Truck Haven, a tiny, independent business offering diesel, food, and accommodation on the outskirts of the town. There were just 3 other trucks in the lot, all of them parked for the night. Warren's motor made a menacing knocking noise before shutting down as he parked far away from the other cars. He knew from experience that he couldn't use his simple tools to remedy this. He would require a qualified mechanic. Fluorescent lights lit the almost vacant interior of the main structure. Behind the counter, a middle-aged woman with bottle-red hair was reading a novel. "Good morning, driver. The coffee is fresh." "Just made it 20 minutes ago," she said, smiling as if she had practiced. "Thank you." "I'd like some," Warren said. "I'm also curious if you have a mechanic available." "Had some issues with the engine. It doesn't sound pleasant." The woman, whose name tag said Doris, gave a pitying frown. "Our mechanic isn't. We have rooms available if you need to wait till 8 o'clock. You would have your choice on a quiet night." Warren looked at his timepiece. 2:43 a.m. He determined that staying was preferable to taking the chance of a more serious breakdown in a more remote place because he had little buffer time in his delivery schedule. He said, "I'll take a room. That coffee too. Any chance." "You haven't anything to eat?" "I can only provide a microwave sandwich at this time of night," Doris remarked, grabbing a registration card. "At 6 Guam, the kitchen opens." Doris finished the papers and gave Warren a key that was fastened to a plastic fob that bore the number 36. The quietest place away from the sounds of the highway is room 36, the last one at the end of the structure. Richardson's Truck Havens. Motel section was obviously from a bygone period. Small windows with thick curtains, separate entrances facing the parking lot, and air conditioners positioned on the wall beneath each window. At the very end of the row, room 36 was farther, apart from its neighbor than the other rooms. Warren discovered a spotless but immobile room inside. On top of a laminate dresser are wood-paneled walls, a fading flowery bedspread, and a small tube television. After putting down his food and coffee, he took out his phone to give his dispatcher an update. Despite being close to a major freeway, there is no signal. While sitting on the bed, he said, "I guess it'll have to wait till morning." The space felt rather chilly in spite of the warm September evening. Warren looked at the air conditioner. It wasn't on. Even though the window was closed tightly, the temperature continued to drop, and his breath was now apparent with every exhale. "What the hell?" Warren rubbed his arms and muttered. Then he saw the radio on the nightstand, an old wooden box that looked like it was from the 1940s and with a fabric-covered speaker and an analog dial. The radio clicked on itself as Warren looked at it. The room was static. Then someone said up, "Overcoming engine issues. The assistance of Richardson. In room 36. Do it again. Driver requirements." The message ended and static resumed. Although the voice had a hollow tone and this old radio shouldn't pick up CB frequencies at all, it sounded like a CB transmission. Warren disconnected it and turned it off. The room was still abnormally cool. Claiming he was too seasoned to be startled by an unfamiliar motel room or a broken radio, he covered himself in the extra blanket from the closet and attempted to eat his sandwich. After 10 minutes, there was a loud banging on his door. The time was 3:17 a.m. For the technician, it's too early. "Who is it?" Warren called, moving slowly closer. The knocking continued, more persistently, but no response was received. Through the peephole, Warren could only see blackness, as though something were hiding it from the outside. "Hi, I'm unable to see you outside." The knocking ceased. There was silence for a moment. Then a masculine voice spoke from nearby. "Have you received your CB message? Claimed that you required assistance in room 36. Warren stopped. There was no message from him. There was no cell coverage, so he couldn't even get through to his dispatcher. "Something went wrong," Warren said. "I didn't message anyone." The speaker on the radio maintained that the driver in room 36 needed immediate assistance. "Man, open up. The weather is chilly." Warren was bothered by something in this comment. This September night was pleasant, but not frigid. However, within room 36, his breath was visible. Forcefully, "I think you should go," Warren said. With eerie composure, the voice said, "Have it your way." "Nevertheless, Warren, I'll see you later. Eventually, drivers like us always find one another." He was alarmed by the use of his name, which Warren had only provided to Doris on the registration card. There were no signs of the guest leaving. Warren dialed the front desk. He inquired as to whether Doris had sent anyone to his room when she responded, "No, sweetheart." She confirmed that I was the only person present. "Do you want the sheriff to be called?" Warren paused. What was he going to tell them? That his door was knocked on by a stranger? That his room was cold for no apparent reason? No worries, that's okay. However, has there ever been an unusual incident in room 36? There was a long pause. "You ask that, but why?" When Doris did answer, her tone was strained. "I was just wondering. It feels different in the room." Doris let out a long sigh. "Look, I'm not allowed to discuss it. There was an incident in 1976, but because you're already inside, the owner believes it's terrible for business. Howard Welch, the driver, stopped here due to engine issues. He was in room 36. How did he end up?" Warren inquired. According to the story, he woke up in the middle of the night, called for assistance using his CB, and claimed that his room was malfunctioning and that the temperature was dropping. In response, another driver indicated he was on his way to assist. The following morning, Howard was located. The room was cool, but they stated it was a heart attack. There is frost on the inside of the window, but the air conditioner is not functioning in mid-July. Furthermore, the driver who was supposed to have answered Howard's call was never located. Warren's gaze strayed to the unplugged radio. Static hissed faintly and it was on again. Warren mutely remarked, "The radio in my room keeps turning on by itself." "What radio?" Confused, Doris inquired. "Our rooms don't have radios, just the TV." "This is an antique wooden radio. It appears to be from the 1950s. The statement is illogical," Doris muttered. Howard's personal radio was the only one that looked like that. He was an antique collector. After his death, it was provided to his family after being noted in the police report. The static on the radio seemed to be reacting to this discovery. Cleared and a voice could be heard. "Warren Mitchell, 19th of September, room 36. I located you." Warren was shocked by the date's terrible meaning. A strange ice storm struck western Oklahoma on September 19th, 1976, killing a number of unprepared truckers. Warren said sharply, "What was the date of Howard Welch's death?" The response from Doris was September 19th, 1976. "The anniversary is today." The radio made a crackling sound. "I'm coming for you, Warren, just as I always do on September 19th for Howard and everyone else in room 36. Warren grabbed the door and yanked it open. He encountered a wall of icy cold in place of the cozy night air. Trucks were sprinkled with snow and the parking lot was covered in ice. He turned back toward room 36, his breath heavy in his throat. A tall, thin man wearing a trucker jacket from the 1970s stood in the doorway. His eyes were milky white, and his face had a hint of blue. "Told you I'd be seeing you down the road, Warren," the person continued. "We truckers have to stick together." Slipping on ice, Warren hurried toward the office. Slow, leisurely footfall crunched on the frost behind him. The office door was locked when Warren arrived. He could see Doris on the phone through the glass, looking agitated. She opened the door for him quickly. She sobbed, "It's happening again. I've called 911, but in this weather, it could be an hour before they arrive." "What weather?" Warren insisted. "It was clear just an hour ago." Doris gestured toward the blizzard that was now raging outside. A small-scale ice storm that was directly focused on Richardson's truck shelter. As the temperature dropped to 17, they huddled in the office through the night. The storm vanished as abruptly as it had appeared at morning. Despite documenting the unusual meteorological phenomenon, authorities were unable to determine its cause. There was no antique radio in room 36, and there were no indications of any disruption. The mechanic inspected Warren's truck and found no signs of the engine issue that had left him stranded. Warren had one last question for Doris before he left. "Has anyone else ever made it through September 19th in room 36? "Not that I'm aware of," she said. "That night, the room is usually unoccupied. 2018 was the last time a driver stayed there on the 19th. The following morning, I found a heart attack." Warren finished his delivery to Arizona, just like Howard, and then he altered his plans to completely avoid western Oklahoma. He didn't again return to the independent motel. However, his truck's CB radio automatically turns on September 19th, no matter where he is, and broadcasts, "Driver in trouble, room 36, coming to help." Additionally, Warren knows that at Richardson's truck refuge, something is waiting for another driver to take the final room at the end of the night every time he drives through the night without stopping. Construction. After 14 years of driving the I-95 corridor, 39-year-old Derek Hansen had mastered every beat of the main artery on the East Coast. He frequently requested the Boston to Bangor route, transporting paper goods to major distribution locations, even though he preferred northern runs despite the difficulties of winter. Derek was loading commercial paper goods headed for Bangor in the middle of November. His well-kept Kenworth T680 had new snow tires and chains in case of necessity, but the prediction called for the first major snowfall in New England. Derek left Boston around 6:15 a.m. with the goal of being in central Maine by early afternoon in order to avoid the heaviest snowfall. As he traveled through southern New Hampshire and Massachusetts, his windshield was intermittently dotted with light snowflakes. Derek saw a maroon freighter with silver stripes following him at a steady distance just north of Portland. Having company on I-95 is not rare, but something about this particular truck brought up a vague memory. Derek pulled off in Augusta for coffee and petrol. Additionally, an older maroon freight ship with worn paint arrived, with construction equipment covered by tarps. Derek went for coffee as the driver stayed inside, still unable to figure out why the truck looked familiar. Snow worsened as it got closer to Waterville. As motorists heeded recommendations to postpone trips, radio reports cautioned that traffic had thinned and conditions were worsening more quickly than expected. Derek could see the maroon freight liner ahead through his working wipers, now moving erratically, slowing sharply, then speeding again. Around mile marker 127, Derek, worried, reached for his CB radio and headed north on I-95. Does anyone have a copy? Acquired a flatbed from a maroon freight vessel traveling wildly. Just letting people know. Static was followed by a voice. This is heading south past Waterville. The circumstances here are nearly white out. The freeway is being closed near Newport Interchange by DOT. Perhaps you should get off soon. Cop that, Derek said. Am I ahead of any other northbound traffic? No, the only northbound truck I've seen in the past 20 minutes is yours, Derek scowled. About 4.5 miles in front of me is a maroon freight liner. From where I am, there is no traffic in front of you. Northbound roads are deserted, save for your lights. As Derek watched the truck's taillights shine through the growing snow, a chill crept into his stomach. The memories then came to the surface. He had seen the aftermath of a pileup from the southbound lanes 7 years prior during another storm in November. There had been a silver-striped maroon freight liner involved. The driver was instantaneously murdered when its cab was crushed. Hours before, Derek had met Cal Mercer, the driver, at a truck stop. The truck couldn't be the same, but the likeness was striking. Derek's headlights suddenly showed an impossibility. Where there should be no exit, there is an unmarked exit ramp. As the freight liner drove into this enigmatic ramp, its brake lights flashed. Derek had made hundreds of trips down this stretch. Here, there was no way out. But there it was, paved, winding into the woods, with the new tracks of the truck. He kept going straight, wondering if the storm was making him confused or if he had somehow missed an emergency access road. Flashing lights emerged 5 miles ahead. The state roadway was blocked by a Maine State Police cruiser, a traffic directing officer. As the trooper got closer, Derek came to a stop. Ahead, highways closed. Over the wind, the officer yelled. The storm grew stronger than anticipated. All traffic is being directed to leave. About 5 miles back. Is there a service road? Derek inquired. There, I watched another truck pull off. The cop had a perplexed expression. This segment contains only the numbered interchanges and no unapproved exits. Which mile marker is it? Unmarked paved road about 132. It was taken by a maroon freight liner. The trooper's face shifted to one of worry. He moved aside to talk into his radio, then came back. Please pull over and accompany me to my car, Mr. Hanson. The usage of his name astonished Derek. Is something wrong? We must converse, even if it's not with you. Sergeant Paul Deskow requested Derek to explain what he had seen in detail inside the patrol car. The sergeant's expression darkened as Derek continued. Are you familiar with a trucking accident here in November 2016? Inquired the man. Derek gave a nod. During a snowstorm, they pile up. One car resembled the maroon freight liner I saw today. Calvin Mercer was the driver of the truck. On impact, he passed away. I recall, Derek responded. That day, I met him at a truck stop in Bangor. Derek was shown a picture by the sergeant. Did you see this truck today? The truck Derek had been pursuing was depicted in the picture. That's it, Derek said. The only difference is that it's more worn. The sergeant muttered. This picture was taken on the day of Mercer's accident. We have 37 different accounts of incidents just like yours in the 7 years following that pileup. Always at the same area, always during the first big snowfall, and always Mercer's truck turning onto an imaginary exit. What do you say? Mercer's GPS showed that he departed the main highway at the precise location where cars claimed seeing this phantom exit. Here's what wasn't made public, though. In the primary crash, Mercer's truck was not involved. It was discovered near the base of an embankment 200 yards into the woodland. According to the evidence, he made a sudden turn off the roadway prior to the collision. There is only woodland. There, no road. However, his truck turned off the highway at what would be considered a typical exit ramp curve. As a result, everyone who reported following that truck, including me, is describing the identical pattern. When they spot the exit, they take it, and wind up on a road that leads more into the forest before coming to a sudden stop at a drop-off, which is exactly where Mercer's truck crashed. Have they crashed? DeSoto reassured him that everyone had stopped in time. However, a lot of people said they had an inexplicable impulse to drive even though they could see the danger ahead. You're telling me this, but why? Derek inquired. As you are the first person to have seen the exit but not taken it in 7 years. I'm attempting to figure out why. I'm not sure, Derek said. I remembered meeting Cal prior to his accident and something didn't feel right. Does Mercer have any connection to this specific area? Derek inquired after making arrangements for overnight lodging. Desau paused. Investigators heard a troubling statement from Calvin's wife. Cal contacted her the night before the collision to pick up an elderly guy who was hitchhiking and insisted they find Lane 7. Cal clarified that there were only 2 lanes in each way on I-95. When he said that northbound Lane 7 is only visible in the snow, the man became upset. Has this hitchhiker been identified? Although there was no sign of a passenger, the truck's path through the forest was precisely 7 meters wide when rescuers discovered it. Derek whispered, as though he had discovered Lane 7. Derek asked the sergeant why he knew his name before he left. Derek was shown another picture by Desco. This image displays Derek and, on the day of the accident, Calvin Mercer was chatting next to a fuel pump. Witnesses overheard what you might not recall. Cal told you about the Lane 7 story and his weird hitchhiker. Save me a spot if you find that Lane 7, you added, laughing it off. Next week, I'll be doing the same run. For 7 years, every driver who reported seeing Mercer's truck had one thing in common. No one knew him directly. No one but you. I was waiting for that. Reason. The next person to notice the exit was always going to be you. Whether you would accept it was the only question. The following day, Derek finished his delivery and asked to be transferred to any route that would avoid central Maine. He stayed away from New England in the winter for 5 years. Then, during the first snowstorm of the season in November 2028, Derek was pushed back onto I-95 due to a staffing shortage. The Crimson Freightliner came into view in his headlights as he got closer to mile marker 132. As if under the influence of an unseen power, Derek's hands twisted the wheel to follow it this time when it turned onto the unmarked exit. The snow-covered forest was traversed by the service road. Derek should stop, he knew. Despite knowing the drop-off was imminent, I felt oddly at ease. He could now see a line of identical maroon Freightliners traveling in a procession down a much wider road via his glass, rather than just one truck. He was beckoned to take his designated place in line by northbound Lane 7, which was visible only in the snow. Numbers were more important to Victor Reeves than humans. He was 52 years old and had accumulated more than 3.5 million miles of freight hauling across America over the course of 3 decades. He was renowned among dispatchers for his accuracy. You may keep an eye on Victor's coming by his Peterbilts if he stated he would arrive at 2:17 p.m. Victor treated driving as a mathematical exercise, in contrast to truckers who idealize their occupation. Estimated arrival was calculated by multiplying average speed by time minus expected delays. He planned his routes to be as efficient as possible, minute-by-minute rest times that minimize downtime. He had achieved financial stability and an outstanding safety record through this meticulous technique. He was the proud owner of a well-maintained 2019 Peterbilt 579 with a 76-inch sleeper cab that had all the amenities a single man could want. Victor took on a shipment of industrial refrigeration parts that were headed for Boise, Idaho, from Chicago in late March. The 1,500-meter trek would traverse the prairies of Iowa and Illinois, Wyoming's wind-sculpted landscapes, Nebraska's boundless horizons, and Idaho's diverse topography. At 4:30 a.m., he left Chicago, traveling through pre-dawn streets before turning west on I-8. Clear skies and exceptional luck for the early spring were predicted by the forecast. Could change quickly, especially in the alpine passes of Wyoming. Victor found his groove on the highway, his thoughts focused on routine computations. 63 is the average speed. 3. Needed rest intervals. 3. Fuel stops. 2. Arrival is anticipated. At 7:45 p.m., after adjusting for time zone differences, the Illinois and Iowa sections went without incident. Victor kept a steady pace, only braking when his carefully estimated fuel usage demanded it. The landscape leveled off as he entered Nebraska on I-80, the roadway extending in nearly perfect alignment toward the horizon. This stretch, which featured miles of flat landscapes under a massive sky, was infamous for creating highway hypnosis. Victor had devised ways to counter this, alternating between box-structured songs and podcasts about mathematics, which reflected his love of order. About 350 miles into his voyage, Victor observed something strange near Kearney, Nebraska. His seldom-used CB radio started to produce bursts of intermittent static in a way that resembled Morse code. The rhythmic static persisted even after. Victor turned the squelch dial, which normally filtered out weaker signals. Before shutting the radio off entirely, he cycled through all 40 channels with the same outcome. Victor looked back to the road as the static subsided. However, the CB turned itself back on and began to emit the same patterned static less than a minute later without being touched. Victor scowled. In his well-maintained truck, electrical problems were uncommon but not unheard of. He just disconnected the CB unit's power supply. Victor had arrived in Wyoming by late afternoon, when the terrain was progressively changing from flatlands to undulating hills. East of Cheyenne, he pulled into a truck plaza for lunch, fuel, and his first required rest. Even though the truck stop was close to a major interstate intersection where coverage was normally available, Victor's cell phone did not show service when he attempted to call his sister in Oregon for their monthly check-in after finishing his logbook entries. Trustworthy. When Victor asked the cashier, "Been that way all day?" she replied. A strange interference of some sort. However, landlines are operational. Victor decided his call could wait and went back to his truck. He saw that the CB radio was back in its cradle and reconnected to power when he stepped into the cab. This was not feasible. In particular, he had unplugged it and kept it under his bunk. Prior to analyzing this disparity, the radio sounded. The pattern of static is now more noticeable. There was a voice, distant and distorted but unmistakably human, within that static, which was initially nearly undetectable. Assist border, with Wyoming. Milestone. Captured. Seeking a logical answer, Victor gazed at the radio. He looked for evidence of intrusion on his truck, but couldn't find any. The security system was activated, and the doors were locked. Nothing is missing. No indications of forced entry. He went back to the radio, which was still repeating a pattern of static interspersed with bits of voice. Something about the voice, its desperate tone, made him pay closer attention. The voice became a little clearer after the controls were adjusted. Does anyone have a copy? Wyoming. Accident near mile marker 401. Urgently needed. Victor's next route would run out of mile marker 401 on I-80 someplace west of Cheyenne. Victor chose to leave earlier than expected, even though he was on time. Authorities should be informed if someone needs assistance. He told the attendant what he had heard and requested that the highway patrol be contacted via the landline. Mile marker 401, you say? The expression of ennui gave way to uneasiness in the attendees. You may wish to reconsider your path. The history of that stretch is not good. Very terrible. What sort of past? Victor inquired. Began 9 years ago. Significant accumulation during an unexpected snowfall. 5 people, including a family with 2 children, were killed in 7 vehicles. Since then, the number of accidents along the route between markers 400 and 405 has almost tripled the average for the state. Victor said, "Thanks for the warning, but I have to stick to my schedule. Clear circumstances are indicated by the forecast." Victor gave the Wyoming Highway Patrol the mile marker and described the situation over the phone. Although no accidents had been recorded there, the dispatcher said a patrol car would be sent to be sure. Victor was unusually vigilant as he turned back onto I-80. He couldn't shake the attendant's warning. There was something off about the event, a break in the neat pattern of his meticulously planned universe. The scenery in Wyoming became increasingly striking. There is little traffic, primarily from nighttime business vehicles. The CB came, alive once more as Victor got closer to mile marker 390. The voice was clearer this time. "Traffic moving west. There will be an accident. Mile 401. Several cars. I need help." It was a female voice with a peculiar rhythm. Information delivery that is nearly clinical and devoid of passion. Victor saw that the temperature had dropped by 10 degrees in just 15 minutes at mile marker 395. The horizon was now obscured by low clouds in the once clear sky. Once more, the radio crackled. Multiple casualties marking 401 urgently needed. Strange background noises, such as emergency sirens, were included in this transmission, but they were stretched out and distorted as though they were playing at an incorrect tempo. Victor noticed danger lights ahead around mile marker 398. A solitary passenger car was on the shoulder, its front end smashed against the railing as he slowed and shifted to high beams. Victor slowed even further as he looked around for other cars or people. The mid-2000 vehicle had serious front-end damage, but strangely there was no broken glass or debris on the road. No fluid leaks or loose bumper parts. The CB burst with excruciatingly loud static as Victor came to a stop around 50 feet behind the damaged vehicle. The voice reappeared, this time seeming to speak straight into the microphone. Keep going. Don't get out of your car." Victor shifted the truck back into drive, but before he could accelerate, he saw the wrecked automobile move. From the driver's side, a woman wearing light-colored clothing, possibly scrubs, moved toward his truck with a strange gliding gait. "Go now," the radio whispered. The pattern, mile marker 401, is repeated. Victor paused, caught between the increasingly bizarre situation and assisting a stranded driver. Then there was a new voice on the CB, male-dominated. "The Wyoming Highway Patrol is this. Every car is close to mile marker 400. Don't pause for anything. Be careful as you go. Continue. Don't stop." Suddenly, Victor's headlights went dark, flickered, and then brightened again. The approaching figure seemed to shift in that brief darkness. Victor briefly saw something that was difficult for his logical mind to comprehend. With his eyes focused on the road ahead, he let go of the brake and accelerated. The CB went on sending words in fragments. "Pat repeats the 9th year of family mile 401. Victor's truck went through what seemed like a curtain of frigid air at precisely mile marker 401. The temperature gauge abruptly plunged, showing an unthinkable -20 degrees. His heater ran at full blast, yet there was still frost on his windshield. Victor noticed many vehicles strewn across both westbound lanes through this thickening layer of ice. A semi-jackknifed obstructing the right lane. Cars carrying passengers crashed into the trailer. There was another truck that was balancing on the side slope. Dark shapes shifted from car to car. They synced their movements in an odd way. The lights and sirens now came from Victor's radio, but there were no real emergency vehicles. Victor broke his safety procedures for the first time in his driving career. Rather than slowing down, he sped up, maneuvering his truck into a small opening in the confusion. The figures all turned together as he went through, following his every step. Victor refused to look closely at the looks on dozens of pale faces. After his truck left the area, the road was abruptly deserted. Stars are visible once more, and the night is clear. The frost on his windshield melted as the temperature stabilized. The CB stopped talking. Victor drove several miles at his increased speed before stopping at a rest place close to Rollins. Shaken hands. Victor saw his dashcam footage after analyzing what he had seen. With one crucial exception, the highway appeared on the video just as he remembered it. At mile marker 401, the roadway was deserted, and the sky was clear. There was no sign of an accident. The only oddity was a brief interference that occurred right around mile marker 401, causing his phone to distort the image for about 3 seconds. Victor called the Wyoming Highway Patrol to inquire about the accident history at the mile marker, since it was now indicating service. 401. The supervisor verified that 9 years prior, at the same spot, there had been a devastating multi-vehicle collision that claimed 5 lives, including a nurse who had stopped to provide assistance. The supervisor also mentioned that we frequently receive calls regarding accidents at that precise location, which is strange. Units never discover anything when they respond. Began almost a year following the initial accident. On clear evenings, always between midnight and 4 a.m. Has anyone said they've seen anyone there? Victor asked thoughtfully. Following a pause, cars say they were flagged down by a woman in white, the nurse who died attempting to assist. Some claim to have witnessed the entire catastrophe unfolding just as it did 9 years ago. Since then, there have been 3 fatalities in that area, all drivers who had halted just before losing control at mile marker 401. Victor arrived precisely on time and finished his trip to Boise without any more problems. He did, however, permanently alter his routing algorithm by setting his GPS to notify him whenever a possible path would bring him close to Wyoming's mile marker 401 on I-80. He had discovered several patterns that were best left unexplored. Sometimes the shortest distance between 2 sites wasn't calculated in miles alone, and other calculations involved variables that weren't strictly mathematical. Accident reports near mile marker 401 have decreased by 73% in the years since Victor's incident, according to Wyoming Highway Patrol records. Starting at that exact moment in the evening, the dash cam of a tractor trailer captured 3 seconds of inexplicable interference. Place. It had been years since Mason Coulter had dreamed. His slumber was a black vacuum that offered him bodily relaxation, but no mental relief after 19 years of transporting freight. He had come to terms with this as another work-related risk at the age of 45. With mechanical accuracy, his body operated on truck time, driving for 11 hours and resting for 10, repeating across time zones. Currently, he is working on automobile components from Arizona to Detroit. Despite having maximum air conditioning, the heat in mid-July made his Kenworth cab feel like an oven. Mason was familiar with this path, every trooper hiding place, dependable cafe, and truck stop. He had no idea that the radiator issue would force him to leave close to Terre Haute at dusk. After 20 meters of ascent, the temperature gauge entered the red zone. Mason went to Foster's vehicle repair by following the signs. Set back from the main road was a tiny enterprise. Tom Foster, a burly man wearing coveralls smeared with oil, came over. Problems with the radiator? Today, you are the third. Cooling systems suffer greatly from this heat. Timeline. Grimaced Tom. My second mechanic called in sick and I had 2 ahead of you. In the best scenario, I begin working on yours tomorrow morning. Are there any other choices in the area? There is a motel down the road, but nothing is open right now. Instead of dozing in your taxi, you might as well get some actual sleep. Mason moved his overnight bag to Tom's pickup and made plans to get out of his truck. As they reached the top of a hill, the Wayside Motel emerged, a 1-story building. From the late 1960s with a neon sign that was buzzing. Mason's credit card was handled by an old woman named Martha, who explained that the motel was almost completely empty. Martha noted, "Unless something's gone wrong, there isn't much call for stops out here. Truck issues, Foster's radiator problems." Mason was given a key by Martha that was fastened to a plastic fob bearing the number 17. Put you at the end, away from the sounds of the roadway. The 17th room was simple but tidy. Mason turned on the television and stretched on the bed after taking a lukewarm shower. He became aware of the silence at that point. Not only is the TV sound muffled, but there is no background noise at all. No distant roadway, no insects outdoors, and no hum from the air conditioner. The quiet seemed heavy, almost oppressive. Reaching the window, he looked through the drapes. Mason saw a tall, skinny man walking toward a camper trailer in the dark parking lot with a strange, shambling gait. After testing the trailer's entrance and looking through its windows, the man went back to his room. He moved in a way that sounded robotic, almost like a marionette with invisible strings. Mason went back to sleep, setting his alarm at 6:30 a.m. Sleep came swiftly, but it was erratic, with half-realized visions of endless unmarked roadways. At regular intervals, strange individuals stood along the shoulder, their eyes reflecting light like animals as they watched his progress. He woke up abruptly at 2:17 a.m. The quiet had shifted. The air itself seemed to be listening, and it felt expectant now. There was a faint scratching noise coming from the door, fingernails moving in a purposeful pattern across the painted surface. 3 slow scrapes. Hold on. 3 more. "Who's there?" Mason yelled. The scratching instantly ceased. Total quiet. There was no service when Mason reached for his phone. There was no phone in the room. Deciding that open conflict was better than uncertainty, Mason walked over to the door and peered through the peephole, but all he saw was black. The scratching started up again, more forcefully. Mason bluffed. "I'm calling the police." A voice, hardly more than a whisper, answered. "Mason, we're asleep. Every one of us. You also need to sleep." The male voice had a peculiar flat affect. The use of his name was more unsettling. "Who are you?" "A fellow journeyer. Come on in. I can put you to sleep. Actual slumber, not the kind of empty you're accustomed to." Mason pulled a metal towel rod out of the washroom and stepped back. Mason resolutely stated, "I don't need help sleeping. Leave. No one is available to call Mason. For years Martha has been sleeping. Except for you. We all have. You continue to move. Continue to drive. Stop now." Slowly the doorknob turned. The only obstacle is the deadbolt. The deadbolt mechanism then made a clicking sound. The noise was unbelievably loud, but the door was still closed. The voice muttered, "Last chance, Mason," and it now appeared to be coming from both within and outside the room. "I'll put you to sleep. The authentic sort. The dreamy sort. Do you not miss having dreams?" Mason did, in fact, miss dreaming. Something fundamental in him had been gradually corroded by the emptiness his sleep had become. "What are you discussing?" "For those who are unable to, we dream. Drivers such as yourself. Never really resting, always in motion. We want you to stop so we can dream your dreams for you." Despite the deadbolt, the door started to open. Mason caught a glimpse of the slender man from before through the growing distance. He had a mannequin-like appearance with features that were excessively symmetrical and smooth. He had abnormal light reflection in his eyes. "Who are you?" Mason made another demand. "Edward Kramer, route from Indianapolis to Phoenix. 32 years of travel. Then I came here one evening, dreamed once more, never went away. What would that have been? The 1990s, 1984. Edward made the correction. June 17th. Problems with the radiator. It was not doable. The man didn't even glance. Over 50. You're telling lies." Edward grinned. "Dreaming causes time to move differently. Mason, it feels like I've been asleep for days, but it's actually been decades. All of us are present. Every driver who pulled over. For those who are unable to, we dream." Behind Edward, more figures emerged. Both men and women moved with same odd shambling gait, and they had the same artificial smoothness and reflected eyes. "Martha hasn't slept since 1972, Edward added. "Tom Foster since 1998. For drivers like you who need to stop, we keep this area maintained." Mason went up to the bathroom window and gave it a try. "I need to make a delivery." Edward grinned, broadly. "Mason, there's no delivery. It never was. It's only the movement dream. For years, we have been calling you here. Every malfunction, every detour, every effort to get you to us." Mason used the towel rod to smash the window and brushed the remaining pieces from the frame. As anticipated, the figures did not move quickly. Rather, they observed with clinical curiosity. "Mason, you can't avoid sleep indefinitely," Edward remarked quietly. "Everyone eventually stops. Everybody has dreams." Lifting himself through the window, Mason dashed for the main road. Ahead came the truck servicing center. Mason found his Kenworth where he had left it when he arrived at the parking lot. There was light coming from the tiny office. Mason discovered his keys inside, along with a completed invoice that had allegedly been in Tom Foster's possession overnight. Replace and flush the radiator. No fee. There was a handwritten note attached. Fixed while you were asleep. Have a safe trip. Continue till you reach Phoenix. TF. Mason looked at his timepiece. 3:42 a.m. He had spent less than 6 hours in the motel, not nearly enough time to replace the radiator entirely. Mason gathered his keys, checked his truck, and discovered everything in good operating condition despite the impossibility. He turned on the car and got out. Mason drove directly through to St. Louis and then west, breaking his own rules about required rest times for the next several hundred miles. Only at Oklahoma City, over 700 meters from Terre did he finally give up due to exhaustion. Despite his extreme exhaustion, Mason battled caffeine, energy drinks, and sleep deprivation. But in the end, biology prevailed. Mason locked his pickup and let himself get knocked out. Mason also experienced vivid, intricate dreams that were more real than the actual world for the first time in years. His phone's search history showed something concerning when he eventually woke up. Although he had no recollection of it, Mason had evidently done some study on the Wayside Motel and Foster's vehicle repair. Search results showed that neither company was in existence. The coordinates were. The only thing he saw during that odd night was an abandoned gas station that had been closed since the late 1960s. Mason's sleep habits saw a significant shift in the months that followed. He started having frequent dreams about travel and roads. On several nights, he woke up confident that Edward Kramer had been painstakingly explaining that everyone stops while seated in his passenger seat. Everyone dreams eventually. Mason continues to travel great distances, but he no longer makes unforeseen detours or pulls off the road for mechanical problems outside of large, congested repair centers. Additionally, he never remains at small-town individual motels where the quiet seems too complete, where other passengers might be, waiting to put him to sleep, the kind of slumber that has dreams. Because Mason is now aware of what occurs in the transitional state between movement and rest, just before falling asleep. He also knows that Edward Kramer and the others are still waiting, still dreaming, still contacting drivers who push themselves too hard, and still keeping their way station open for people who need to stop for good. All of this is happening somewhere in Indiana. For 16 years, Graham Wheeler has been the driver of the I-20 and I-10 route from Dallas to El Paso every third week. His hands, which were 49, had sunspots and calluses from holding a steering wheel for a lifetime. He squinted into the unforgiving Texas sun, leaving his eyes permanently wrinkled. Graham took solace in the immense nothingness of West Texas, in contrast to many truckers who grumbled about its monotony. In his life of continual moving, the endless horizons, solitary messes, and magnificent cloud formations were all constants. Graham left Dallas in early October with building supplies headed toward El Paso. As he got used to the comfortable interstate rhythm, his Peterbilt 579 hummed gently. His body was on a precise internal timetable since he had run this run so many times. He was fully aware of which rest areas and where to fill up, possessed hygienic facilities, and knew which areas needed to be watched after for wildlife or highway patrol. The first day went by without incident. As the sun sank, dark shadows stretched across the truck terminal as Graham arrived at his regular stop in Midland. He finished his logbook and went to his sleeper cab after taking a shower and eating at the diner. By 5:30 a.m., he was back, on the road, headlights piercing the darkness as he drove west on I-20, having woken up before daybreak. To keep track of complaints of speed traps or other road problems, Graham turned on his CB radio. Graham saw something strange in his reflection as the sun rose above the horizon. Behind him, a dark SUV kept a steady distance. His speed fluctuated, but he neither passed nor fell back. Such conduct was not unusual. Following a professional trucker through uncharted territory was a source of comfort for several civilian drivers. However, something about this car raised Graham's natural prudence. Maybe its steadfast stance or windows tinted darker than Texas law allows. When nothing had changed after 20 minutes, Graham put his following to the test. He slowed from 65 to 55 VMRA while observing the SUV slow down in a similar manner, while staying precisely the same distance. The SUV matched exactly when Graham went back to his previous speed, I-20 westbound close to Monahan's. Has anyone else noticed a dark SUV this morning that is shadowing trucks? Over CB, Graham inquired. A voice answered. Absolutely, Wheeler. A black Suburban that you had been pursuing for perhaps 30 meters before it broke away behind you. Driving oddly and maintaining a perfect distance are constants. Gave me the chills. Graham's pain was not alleviated by this confirmation. He chose a straightforward test when he got closer to the intersection of I-20 and I-10. He signaled and got off on a state highway that would eventually reconnect with I-10 further west, rather than taking his regular route. The SUV came next. Graham's discomfort increased. This tracking was intentional. He grabbed his cell and dialed dispatch. Finding no service is inconvenient right now, but it's not uncommon in isolated West Texas. With sporadic oil pump jacks, the state roadway wound through level desert terrain. Graham sped up a little as he observed the SUV's mechanically precise position maintenance. Graham saw a roadside rest stop after 10 miles. It was merely a gravel turnout with a covered picnic table and a basic bathroom. Impulsively, he parked, lining up his pickup to observe the SUV's actions. He was surprised that the SUV didn't slow down as it passed. Around a corner, Graham saw its taillights fade away. He might have overreacted. The SUV might either a trainee learning how to keep a safe following distance or law enforcement conducting surveillance. Graham refilled his coffee, used the facilities, and got ready to go on. He was finishing up his pre-departure check when he noticed a flash of metal underneath the trailer. Graham squatted and looked between the back wheels. A little metallic object, about the size of a paperback book and devoid of any distinguishing markings, had been fastened to the undercarriage. It was positioned as a tracking device, indicating deliberate concealment. Graham wanted to take it off right away, but caution held him back. Eliminating it could cause an alarm whoever put it there, which might make things worse. Rather, Graham went through his examination as though he had seen nothing out of the ordinary, and then he headed back to the freeway. Graham's mind was racing with options while he waited for the SUV to return on I-10, about 2 hours away from El Paso. Was his cargo causing him to be tracked? There wasn't much value in the building supplies. Was it a personal matter? Graham was unable to come up with a clear reason for someone to follow him. It crackled on his CB radio. From east to west, the Border Patrol checkpoint 20 meters east of Sierra Blanca is experiencing unusual activity. Every business vehicle is being pulled over for a follow-up examination, looking for a certain thing. A fresh voice attested, the checkpoint is now being passed by this westbound vehicle. Everything with wheels and a DOT number is being inspected. Equipment that dogs scan. The process. Allow for a minimum of 1 hour's delay. The checkpoint was about 50 miles in front. Graham was heading into trouble if the tracker had anything to do with whatever the Border Patrol was looking for. It was another voice. Heads west. About 10 miles east of the checkpoint, a black Suburban is speeding along the shoulder and avoiding traffic. No marks, but it seems official. The coincidence was too great. Graham quickly decided to take the next exit onto a lesser state route that would completely avoid the checkpoint. After traveling this badly maintained road for 20 minutes, Graham noticed a turnoff that leads to a defunct gas station. He turned off the engine and steered, his truck behind the building, out of sight from the highway. He noticed movement in his mirror as he reached for his cell phone, which had just 1 bar of service. The black Suburban had pulled off the freeway. Before the call could connect, Graham hung up, observing the SUV circle the property before, coming to a stop in front of the structure, obstructing his only way out. There was uneasy stillness for some minutes. The driver came out before Graham could make up his mind. A 30-something man without any distinguishing marks, dressed casually. After a careful survey of the land, he took a small electronic gadget out of his pocket and looked at it for a moment before turning to face Graham's hidden truck. The man started to move toward the building's rear, movements with a purpose. Graham recognized the gadget as probably a tracker receiver. The man was fully aware of Graham's hiding place. Graham shifted into gear, fired up his engine, and accelerated. Around the building's other side, Graham guided the vehicle toward a hole in the deteriorating barrier, and it lurched over uneven terrain. Graham could see the man running back toward the Suburban in his mirror, but the truck's head start was enough. Graham had already arrived at the state highway and was speeding toward its intersection with a county road that he knew would eventually go back to I-10 beyond the checkpoint. When the SUV's engine roared to life, Graham drove with concentrated determination for the next 40 minutes, taking turns further into the secondary road network. The Suburban showed up, sometimes in his mirrors, sometimes getting closer before Graham's familiarity with the terrain allowed him to widen the distance. Graham was unprepared for the roadblock that materialized as he turned a corner. There were two unmarked SUVs in both lanes, and there were armed people in tactical gear standing next to them without any visible law enforcement markings. Graham did not stop, but he slowed. His gut told him that compliance was risky because they weren't properly identified. He abruptly turned onto a dirt track that was just a little bit too narrow for his pickup. Graham saw a group of buildings in the distance after traveling several miles along this unpaved road, the first indication of a real human presence after leaving the highway was a small ranch. Seeking help, or at least witnesses, he steered his pickup in its direction. Graham could see it was a working ranch as he got closer. He pulled into the door of a main home where a number of cars were parked and honked loudly. An elderly man appeared, his face changing from interest to worry. Graham was about to explain when the black Suburban sped up on the dirt track. The rancher pulled a weapon from a neighboring car, startled by the scenario. The sight of the armed rancher caused the Suburban to slide to a stop. The Suburban reversed and drove off along the dirt track after a heated exchange. Graham found out the reason 3 days after reporting the event to the local police department and his company's security department. Targeting truckers along the I-10 corridor, the tracker was a component of a complex cargo theft scheme. The burglars were able to identify valuable cargo by insider knowledge, fitted tracking devices on specific trucks, and then used strategies to trick drivers into thinking they were interacting with law authorities to intercept cars at distant locations. Graham came into a phony checkpoint that had been used to rob a number of drivers. Graham was spared by a straightforward scheduling mistake. The robbers had mistaken his truck for another that had left Dallas that same day and was transporting expensive equipment. Graham was unable to resume his usual path in spite of this resolution. His relationship with the wide road had been profoundly changed by the encounter, turning what had once been a reassuring solitude into an uncertain vulnerability. Graham moved to a regional role 6 months later that permitted him to come home every night. He continues to drive, but never by himself, and never on that specific section of the West Texas Highway where he learned that the most perilous vanishing point was not on the far horizon, but rather in the twilight zone, which is the area between legitimate authority and its convincing counterfeit, where one wrong turn could cause a man and his 16 years of experience to vanish completely. Timothy Garland had been a commercial truck driver for 18 years. At 43, the creases around his eyes had deepened from many hours of squinting into sunrises and sunsets, and his once dark hair had started to recede, revealing his aged forehead. In contrast to many drivers who favored Tim specialized in deliveries to remote areas, which required lonely stretches and narrow mountain roads where assistance could be hours away in the event of an emergency. These were predictable interstate circuits with frequent truck breaks and dependable phone connection. This knowledge led Tim to accept delivering sensitive geological monitoring equipment to a research station in New Hampshire's White Mountains. Many drivers had turned down the position because of the early October timing, when mountain weather could abruptly change from lovely autumn to hazardous winter. With his Peterbilt rumbling happily through progressively diminishing morning traffic, Tim left outside Boston at dawn. Clear skies and a dip in temperature after dusk were predicted. Nothing worrying for a driver in Tim's situation. Tim turned onto the Forest Service road that led to the station by mid-afternoon. His truck's suspension was put to the test, as the pavement soon gave way to packed gravel and subsequently to a rougher condition. A tunnel of pine and birch was formed by dense woodland, and it occasionally opened to show breathtaking views. of the neighboring mountains, which were painted in vibrant fall hues. Tim had to drive cautiously around tight turns where the shoulders occasionally collapsed into precipitous drop-offs as the road grew narrower as it climbed. Something about this specific path caused discomfort, maybe the odd quiet or the shadows that seemed to grow strangely deep in spite of the bright afternoon sun. Tim came upon a surprising sight around 12 miles up the mountain. A tiny white vehicle pulled into a tight turn and parked. Weak blinking of the danger lights. There was no sign of a driver. His semi could not safely pass without verifying that the automobile was actually empty since the road was too narrow. Tim applied the brakes, picked up his flashlight, and got out of the cab. It felt a lot colder than it had been minutes before. Carefully, he walked up to the vehicle and called out to let it know he was there. "Hi there. Who's there? Do you need assistance with your vehicle?" There was no answer. Tim walked around the car, observing that although it was parked on a steep slope, it lacked wheel chocks. From inside, the windows were foggy. As he saw a tiny handprint against the inside glass of the driver's side window, as though a youngster had attempted to reach out. Tim's discomfort turned into worry. "Is there anyone inside? Are you all right?" He tapped on the window and called more urgently. Inside, there was a definite sound of movement. Silence, followed by a shuffling. The doorknob was unlocked when Tim tested it. His flashlight beam pierced the dark interior as he pulled it open. There was nobody in the vehicle. Confused, Tim stood, sure he had just heard movement and seen the handprint. He looked all over the car, but the only item he could find was a child's sketch of a stick figure family next to what might have been the research station on the passenger seat. A signature was placed on the drawing. "Emma is 6 years old." Tim carefully returned the drawing after taking a picture of it. He considered his options and ultimately chose to go to the research station 8 miles higher. He would notify the employees of the abandoned car and any indication that a youngster might be around. Tim felt his heart falter as he withdrew and took one last look in the mirror. Beside the automobile, a tiny person wearing a red jacket watched him go. Tim jogged back toward the vehicle after braking and jumping out of the cab. The small girl, whose blonde hair was arranged in 2 asymmetrical braids, stood still and watched him approach with a rather serious demeanor for her age. "Hey there," Tim said, reducing his speed. "Are you Emma? Your folks are where?" The girl didn't respond. Her eyes seemed to be looking through him instead than at him. "Are you lost?" Tim crouched to her eye level and tried again. "I can assist you in locating your parents." In the quiet woodland, the girl's voice was strangely clear when she eventually spoke. "At the top, are they? I was instructed to wait in the automobile, but I became chilly. The study facility, is that where your parents work?" She answered. "They went to fix the machines." Tim was relieved by the equipment that listened. To the mountain. The infant had been left in the car for a while, and her parents must be station employees. Nevertheless, it seemed incredibly careless to abandon a child in such a remote place. "Maybe I could drive you up to your folks' house?" Tim volunteered. "The temperature is dropping and darkness is approaching." The girl nodded after giving this some unnervingly grown-up, serious thought. "The noise from the mountain is increasing. Before it becomes too noisy, the machines must be fixed." Emma was assisted by Tim into his truck. She answered his inquiries sparingly and cryptically as they ascended, often reverting to remarks about the machines and the mountain growing louder. Tim saw that even though Emma was wearing only the light red jacket over summer-weight clothes, she didn't appear cold. At last the research station appeared, a collection of practical structures close to the peak, encircled by monitoring apparatus and antenna arrays. It seemed strange to Tim that there were no other cars in the parking lot. Without a car, how had Emma's parents gotten to the station? "Is this where your parents are?" As he maneuvered his truck into the loading area, Tim inquired. Emma. She looked toward the main building and nodded. "They're inside fixing the machines." After assisting Emma out of the taxi, Tim went to the station's door, observing with increasing unease that the building seemed to be absolutely empty. There were no lights coming from inside, The gusty wind carried no noises of activity. When the main entrance was opened and swung open, a reception area with evidence of hurried abandonment was revealed. Desks with coffee cups remaining half full, computers were left running, a chair with a jacket draped over it. "Hello?" Tim yelled, his voice resonating into the void. "Who's here? Emma is accompanying me." There was no answer. Tim glanced down at the girl who stood quietly next to him, seemingly unfazed by the station's desolation. "Emma, where are your parents?" Without hesitation, she pointed to a hallway and said, "The listening room. Where they hear the mountain." There was a serious problem. A youngster left alone, an abandoned car, and a desolate research station. It was all illogical. When he lifted the receiver, the station's landline gave him nothing but dead air, while Tim's cell phone displayed no service. Tim discovered a framed family portrait of a middle-aged couple, with a young blonde on the desk in the administrative office. A girl in front of this exact station. Emma was clearly the girl. The date, October 17th, 2019, is printed in the corner, nearly 2 years prior. "Emma," Tim replied cautiously as he held out the picture. "Is this you and your parents?" "Before." The mountain began to speak. Emma gave a somber nod. Tim felt a shiver of fear. After searching the reception area, he discovered a cutting from the newspaper that had been stored under plastic. "Tragedy at the research station" was the headline. In the White Mountain landslide, 3 people are thought to be deceased. The report explained how, 2 years prior, extraordinary seismic activity had caused a devastating landslide that buried a portion of the station. Doctors Robert and Linda Harlow, as well as their 6-year-old daughter Emma, were among those thought to be deceased. Emma had been standing there when Tim turned, but the reception area was deserted. A child's giggling erupted from somewhere farther into the building, and then there was a noticeable rumble of movement inside the mountain itself. Tim sensed a strong tremor through his boots. The monitoring equipment's warning lights started to flash. The wind outside grew sharply stronger, racing clouds in a darkening sky. With trembling palms, Tim dashed back to his truck. The earth below shuddered. The parking lot was littered with tiny stones. Just as the first significant vibration struck, he turned on the engine. Tim saw the station one last time in his mirror as he steered his truck out. Emma stood in the doorway, her shadow against the dark inside of the structure. The globe appeared to tremble as she held up her hand in goodbye. Screaming engine. Brakes and hairpin maneuvers made much faster than safety would have allowed, turned the descent into a nightmare. Tim almost lost control twice as the vibrations got worse. He went by where the white sedan had been parked, but it was no longer there. Tim called the police as soon as he was back on the major roadway and had mobile service again. Despite the sending of search and rescue teams, a violent localized storm prevented them from arriving at the station until the next morning. What they discovered was nearly identical to the situation from 2 years prior. Most of the facilities had been destroyed by a huge avalanche. The incident was categorized as a natural disaster in the official report. Tim's experience was recorded, but it was mostly written off as the result of high-altitude stress and oxygen deprivation. Deliveries to isolated alpine locales are no longer accepted by Timothy Garland. He limits his excursions to well-traveled roads and major highways. He has only told a select group of reliable drivers about his experience, and the majority of them respond with courteous skepticism. However, Tim sometimes runs into another driver who stops talking when he tells his story, someone who has had their own unexplainable experience with the remote origins of America, locations where, in some circumstances, the lines separating the past from the present and between life and memory appear to blur. The unspoken question lingers between them at these times of mutual understanding. What occurs when regular individuals attempt to perform their tasks and run into the extraordinary? Furthermore, how do they keep moving forward knowing what lies ahead, forgotten? Highways? For 16 years, Alec Morrison had been transporting cargo around the Midwest. His living room felt more familiar than his Freightliner Cascadia at 43. Before dashboard alerts arrived, every vibration warned him of issues. Alec handled treacherous secondary roadways, in contrast to drivers who favored dependable interstates. When the weather closed, he knew which county roads saved time, important thoroughfares, and which little villages had trustworthy mechanics. He accepted a delivery from Des Moines to Kearney, Nebraska, as a result of this understanding. Due to an accident that partially stopped I-80, most traffic had to take long detours. Alec, however, had an alternative. County and state routes would avoid the shutdown, resulting in a mere 90-minute delay. He left Des Moines behind, ignoring the official detour on his GPS. It was midday on a Tuesday in late October. With his vehicle rumbling, he left the traveled roadways behind in an hour. Across countless fields that have been harvested, Alec kept a mental map of the places he would stop for fuel. Fuel deserts, areas where running short meant major hardship, were created by the closure of numerous small-town stations in rural America. Alec decided he had enough petrol to get to Grand Island as nightfall drew near. However, on parts of his makeshift route he was unfamiliar with, he would be cutting it closer than he desired. Despite occasional farm equipment, he was able to retain 55 miles per hour because Nebraska State Road 38 was in good condition. There wasn't much traffic, just local tractors and pickups. Alec came upon unexpected signals as dusk neared, around 40 miles east of Grand Island. State Road 38 will be blocked after the detour. Take the diversion. Traffic traveling north was diverted onto a county road by orange barricades. Alec examined his GPS, which showed the county road ultimately reuniting with his planned itinerary. He took the detour onto County Road 23 after 15 meters and noticed right away that there were no other automobiles. After the state highway's mild traffic, the abrupt sense of seclusion felt odd. The second oddity was the state of the road. This county road was severely neglected in contrast to the state highway, which was kept up. A washboard look is produced by cracked asphalt, crumbling shoulders, and faded center lines. Alex turned on his high beams as night fell, lighting a dilapidated road. His cell phone showed no service, and since he'd turned onto the detour, he hadn't seen another car. Now his fuel gauge displayed only less than a quarter tank, enough to get to Grand Island, but not by as much as would be ideal. Alec came onto another sign 8 meters into the diversion. Continue your detour. Make a right turn. This was not what was expecting. County Road 23 continued straight for a few more miles, according to his GPS. Alex paused, weighing his choices. Beyond the detour, road-closed barriers were visible in his headlights. Sign. Alec reluctantly went right onto CR-17B, where he had to slow down to 30 miles, since the road deteriorated to packed gravel. The new road wound across gently altered landscape. His headlights were swallowed by pools of darkness created by the transition from flat farmland to more varied geography, with sporadic tree stands. After traveling what ought to have been a sufficient distance to re-establish his initial path, Alec checked his GPS once more. He was seen moving through empty space on the screen. Not a road showed the location of his obviously driving vehicle. He was worried about the fuel issue. Constant twisting, accelerating, and slowing had raised consumption. Now the gauge was in emergency mode, hovering barely above the 1.8 point. Unexpectedly, the next detour sign came up. Continue your detour. Direct him onto a smaller dirt track by turning left. Alex came to a complete stop and got out of the taxi to look behind the detour signs. Beyond the portable signs, he could see no barriers, no construction equipment, no washed-out culverts, and no clear cause for another diversion in the beam of his flashlight. It felt more and more inappropriate. It was uncommon to take several detours on small rural roads, especially when there was no visible road construction. Alec's phone was still not working when he tried to call his dispatcher. And problem. Notice appeared on the truck's satellite communication system. Alec chose to ignore the diversion signs and keep driving straight on CR-17B. Following, Alec saw a dim glimmer in the distance at around 2 miles. A lone streetlight illuminated the parking lot of a building that stood lonesomely next to the road. There was a sign that said, "Last Chance Gas and General Store." He felt a wave of relief. Seeing no other cars, he steered his pickup onto the gravel parking lot. The building was strangely anachronistic, a timber construction with a false front, evocative of the architecture of the frontier age, even though the open sign was glowing in the window. The petrol pumps seemed remarkably contemporary by contrast. Behind the counter, Alex saw an old man with steel-gray hair. "Evening," said the elderly man. "Did you run into the detours?" Alec gave a nod. "Fuel is running low. Do you have diesel?" "Yes, please. The third pump." "What's with all the detours?" Alec questioned as he got ready to head back to his truck. There was no visible road construction. The elderly man's face changed somewhat. "Issue with the Department of Transportation. It has to do with soil testing. Been ongoing for almost a month." Alex saw activity in his side mirror as he made his way back to his truck. A woman is standing just beyond the reach of the streetlights. She was dressed in a dark blouse and skirt that seemed more appropriate for an office than a country gas station, and she looked to be in her 30s. In what appeared to be a warning motion, she held up one hand. She nodded back the direction Alec had come, shook her head firmly, and pointed along the road that continued past the store. The entrance of the store opened before Alec could answer. The old owner came out, scanning the area as though in quest of something. He did not acknowledge the woman's existence as his eyes went straight over the area where she stood. A little later, he went back inside. The female. With more haste, she made the same motions, pointing back the direction Alec had come, before making the familiar motion for danger by putting her finger across her throat. Alex turned on his engine, but made a cautious turn to leave the parking lot the way he had come. He did not move forward to the diesel pump. He discovered nothing but empty gravel, where the woman had been standing as his headlights swept across it. She was gone. As his anxiety increased, Alex sped back onto CR-17B and headed back the way he had come. Even though his fuel gauge was just over critical, he had a gut feeling that it would be better to go back on the state highway than to face whatever was ahead. Alec went back, avoiding the signs for the diversion. The road looked quite acceptable, despite the caution warnings. About 3 miles later, he noticed a green reflective sign that said, State Road 38, 2 miles away. Alec's gasoline warning light came on as he eventually merged back onto the state highway. His onboard computer indicated that he still had around 30 miles of range, which, if he continued to go at a constant speed, would allow him to reach Grand Island. Alec rolled in accordance with his calculations, his engine sputtering from near empty tanks. He pulled into a truck stop. He reported the odd deviations to his dispatcher after refueling. He was shocked to learn that there were no official detours on State Road 38. The highway department attested that there would be no construction and that the route was completely open. 2 days later, during the day, Alec purposefully took the same route on his way back. State Road 38 revealed no evidence of recent construction or detour signs when he located what should have been the turnoff for County Road 23. All he could see was an unsigned dirt access road that was obviously unfit for business use. Most unsettling of all, Alec was told by long-standing locals that there was no Last Chance Gas and General Shop in the county when he inquired about it at a nearby cafe. Following the strange disappearance of its elderly owner, the Soul Petrol station on County Road 17B shuttered its doors in 1994. Years earlier, the structure had burned down, leaving only a concrete foundation covered in prairie grasses. Alec Morrison is still a driver on the Midwest's secondary roadways. However, he no longer veers off of well-known, charted routes after dark, and he obsessively makes sure his fuel tank is always filled to the brim, never letting it fall below half. He discovered that after sunset, some roadways are in a separate universe. Detours that lead to locations that only appear when darkness and solitude provide the ideal environment for them to do so, rather than to other paths. Locations where, if you're smart enough to listen, people may give you life-saving warnings. Finish. We appreciate you staying with us through the very finish. Your assistance really does make a difference. Please remember to hit like, leave a comment below with your opinions, and subscribe if you like this story so you don't miss any more. We owe our sponsors a big debt of gratitude for keeping the lights on and the wheels turning. Without you, we couldn't accomplish this. Till the next time, be careful when driving. Additionally, keep in mind that often the scariest stories, that's what we tell ourselves.